The text message wasn't meant for me. I know this because my wife Sarah never calls me babe, and she certainly doesn't send me photos of herself in lingerie at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. I stared at her unlocked phone on our kitchen counter, my coffee growing cold beside it, as 15 years of marriage crystallized into a single, devastating moment of clarity. I should have known something was off when Sarah started going to evening yoga 3 times a week. My wife, who once claimed downward dog gave her vertigo, suddenly couldn't get enough of her new instructor Jason's revolutionary approach to mindfulness. She'd come home with flushed cheeks and messy hair, smelling of unfamiliar cologne rather than incense. The signs were all there. The mysterious gym bag that never seemed to contain actual workout clothes, the sudden password changes on her social media accounts, the way she'd angle her phone away from me while texting. But I trusted her. That's what marriage is supposed to be about, right? Trust. Looking back, I realized the changes started shortly after Jason's studio opened downtown. Sarah had insisted on trying it after her friend Amanda raved about the life-changing experience. I even encouraged her, thinking it might help with the stress from her accounting job. If I'd known stress relief meant sleeping with her instructor, I might have suggested therapy instead. The messages scrolled endlessly before my eyes. Months of conversations, each one a fresh betrayal. They'd been methodical in their deception, planning their rendezvous around my business trips and late meetings. Sarah had even created a fake weekly book club to cover their Thursday night encounters. The same book club she'd insisted I needn't feel guilty about missing when I offered to rearrange my schedule to join. Meeting ran late. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Still thinking about last time. Jason's message blinked on the screen, followed by details that made my stomach turn. Sarah's reply was equally explicit, complete with plans for their next encounter at some rental cottage by the lake paid for with our joint credit card. I realized with growing rage. My hands shook as I scrolled through their chat history. The casual way they discussed their deception felt almost as painful as the betrayal itself. "Hubby's out of town next weekend," Sarah had written. "Let's make it count." They'd even joked about how oblivious I was, how easily I accepted her excuses. I set the phone down, my mind racing through options. I could confront her immediately, but that would mean losing the advantage of knowing. No, this required careful planning. Sarah had orchestrated months of elaborate lies. She deserved an equally thoughtful response. First, I needed evidence not just for my own peace of mind, but for what would come next. Taking a deep breath, I picked up her phone again and began forwarding their conversations to my email. Then I photographed the credit card statements she'd carelessly left logged in, showing payment after payment to Lakeview Rentals. My lawyer would appreciate the thorough documentation, I thought grimly. As I worked, a new message from Jason appeared. "Can't stop thinking about you. Delete this after reading." Well, I thought as I saved another screenshot, Sarah wouldn't be deleting anything anymore. She'd chosen to play this game. Now it was my turn to make a move, and I intended to win. That evening, I watched Sarah perform her usual routine with a newfound awareness that made my skin crawl. She hummed while preparing dinner, occasionally checking her work emails on her phone, completely unaware that I'd seen every message she'd exchanged with Jason that day. The casual ease of her deception was remarkable. She'd perfected the art of living 2 lives, while I'd been living in only one. "Mike from the office is organizing another team dinner next Thursday," she mentioned casually, stirring the pasta sauce. "I told him I'd help coordinate since I'll be there anyway for book club." Her voice didn't waver. There wasn't the slightest hint of guilt in her expression. I wondered how many other lies had slipped past those lips, how many times I'd smiled and nodded, completely blind to the truth. I managed to maintain my composure through dinner, even as she chatted about mundane things. Amanda's new car, her mother's upcoming visit, the neighbor's noisy renovation project. Each casual conversation felt like another twist of the knife. When she mentioned Jason's studio in passing, commenting on how everyone was talking about his innovative teaching methods, I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to keep from losing it completely. Later that night, I lay awake beside her, listening to her steady breathing and remembering all the times she'd claimed to be too tired for intimacy. Now I knew why. The thought of her with Jason made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had already set things in motion that afternoon, making several crucial phone calls while she was still at work. The first call had been to Marcus, my oldest friend and, more importantly, one of the city's most ruthless divorce attorneys. The second was to a private investigator he'd recommended, a discreet professional who specialized in infidelity cases. The third call had been to my bank, where I quietly began the process of separating our finances. Sarah might have been clever about hiding her affair, but she'd been careless with the evidence. The next morning, I left for work early, telling Sarah I had a breakfast meeting. Instead, I met with the PI, Lauren, at a coffee shop across town. She looked nothing like the stereotypical investigator, more like a soccer mom who'd stopped in for a latte. But her eyes were sharp as she reviewed the evidence I'd gathered. "The lake house is a good lead," Lauren said, examining the credit card statements. "But we need more than just messages and payments. We need irrefutable proof." She laid out her plan. Surveillance, tracking, building a comprehensive case that would leave no room for denial. "Give me 2 weeks," she promised. "They'll get sloppy. They always do." I threw myself into work that week, using it as a shield to hide my churning emotions. Sarah seemed to notice nothing amiss, too caught up in her own deceptions to recognize mine. Each evening, she'd return from her various activities: yoga, book club, team dinners, and I'd pretend to believe her stories while silently cataloging each lie. Lauren's updates arrived daily. Photographs of Sarah's car parked outside Jason's studio long after class hours, receipts from restaurants where they'd shared intimate dinners, evidence of hotel stays booked under his name. But the lake house was the key. They had a reservation for the upcoming weekend, when Sarah was supposedly attending a women's wellness retreat. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed one final, undeniable piece of evidence. Something so concrete that Sarah couldn't twist her way out of it with more lies. Something that would not only ensure my victory in the divorce but would shatter the carefully constructed fantasy world she'd built with her lover. As I reviewed Lauren's latest report, a plan began to form. Sarah's wellness retreat was approaching, and this time, her weekend getaway wouldn't go quite as planned. I smiled for the first time in days as I began making arrangements. Let them have their romantic rendezvous. I'd make sure it was one they'd never forget. The days leading up to Sarah's retreat passed with excruciating slowness. Each morning, I watched her select her outfit with extra care, knowing she was dressing for Jason's eyes, not mine. Each night, I endured her increasingly transparent excuses for staying late at work, preparing for her upcoming presentation. The lies had become so routine that they flowed from her lips like water, drowning our 15 years of marriage in a sea of deceit. Lauren's surveillance confirmed my suspicions about their planning. Sarah had been meeting Jason during lunch breaks to coordinate their weekend, blissfully unaware of the photos being taken from across the street. They'd chosen an upscale lakeside cottage, more romantic than their usual haunts. According to Lauren's intel, Jason had even arranged for champagne and roses to be waiting in the room, all charged to a credit card in his wife's name. Apparently, Sarah wasn't the only one living a double life. The weight of what I was about to do pressed heavily on my chest. Not from guilt Sarah had burned that bridge with her first lie, but from the immensity of dismantling a life we'd built together. Our friends, our families, our social circle. Everything would change after this weekend. I'd already secured a new apartment and quietly moved essential documents and irreplaceable belongings. The movers were scheduled for Saturday, while Sarah would be finding her inner peace at the retreat. Thursday night, Sarah packed her weekend bag while I pretended to work on my laptop. She'd chosen her most alluring lingerie, tucked beneath yoga pants and spiritual retreat brochures. The performance was almost admirable. She'd even printed out a fake retreat schedule and left it on the kitchen counter, complete with meditation times and wellness workshops. "I'm so excited for this journey of self-discovery," she gushed over dinner, her eyes bright with anticipation that had nothing to do with meditation. "Amanda says these retreats can be life-changing." Another lie. Amanda hadn't been returning her calls lately, as Lauren had discovered. Their friendship had cooled after Amanda caught Sarah and Jason in a compromising position at a local wine bar. "I'm sure it will be revealing," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Sometimes these experiences show us who we really are." Sarah missed the edge in my tone, too wrapped up in her own deception to notice mine. She smiled and squeezed my hand across the table, the gesture so familiar yet now tainted with betrayal. That night, I finalized the arrangements with Lauren and Marcus. The PI had organized surveillance of the cottage from multiple angles, while my lawyer had prepared all necessary documentation. Everything was in place for Saturday's confrontation. I'd chosen to act then rather than Friday night, wanting them to have just enough time to feel secure in their deception before I shattered their illusion of control. Friday morning, Sarah kissed me goodbye with practiced casualness. "Try not to miss me too much," she said, wheeling her weekend bag to her car. "I'll be too busy centering my chi to check my phone much." I watched her drive away, knowing she'd head straight to Jason's place before they began their romantic getaway together. The next 24 hours were a blur of activity. The movers arrived early Saturday morning, efficiently packing up my life while leaving Sarah's things untouched. Lauren kept me updated on the lovers' movements. They'd arrived at the cottage Friday afternoon and hadn't left since. They ordered dinner in, drank champagne on the deck, and settled in for what they thought would be a passionate weekend away from prying eyes. By Saturday afternoon, my new apartment was set up, the divorce papers were prepared, and everything was in place. I sat in my car outside the lake house, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with a message from Lauren confirming that Sarah and Jason were still inside, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. I checked my watch, 6:30 p.m. Time to end this charade. I stepped out of my car, straightened my jacket, and began walking toward the cottage. Behind me, Marcus and Lauren pulled up quietly in separate vehicles, ready to play their parts in the final act of this drama. The weekend of self-discovery Sarah had planned was about to become very different from what she'd imagined. The lake house stood before me, windows glowing warmly in the deepening twilight. Through the large bay window, I could see them lounging on the couch, sharing wine and intimacies that were never meant to be theirs. The sight sent a wave of emotion through me, not just anger, but a profound sadness for the death of trust that had once seemed unshakable. Lauren had given me a key card copy. Apparently, the rental company's security wasn't as robust as their prices would suggest. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of 15 years of marriage, countless memories, and shattered promises concentrated in that small piece of plastic. Behind me, Marcus and Lauren waited in their cars, ready to document everything that was about to unfold. The key card worked silently, efficiently, just like Sarah's betrayal. I entered the house with measured steps, hearing their laughter float down from the living room. They were sharing jokes, probably congratulating themselves on another successful deception. The sound of Sarah's happiness, so genuine, so carefree, with another man felt like acid in my veins. "The retreat must be really enlightening," I called out as I reached the top of the stairs. The laughter stopped abruptly. I heard a glass shatter, followed by Sarah's sharp intake of breath. When I entered the living room, the scene before me was exactly what I'd expected, yet it still felt like a punch to the gut. Sarah stood frozen, wearing the red silk robe I'd given her for our anniversary. Jason, shirtless and stunned, had instinctively moved away from her on the couch. The spilled wine spread across the coffee table like blood, dripping onto the expensive carpet neither of them was paying attention to anymore. "Mark," Sarah whispered, her face draining of color. "I can explain, Dash." "Can you?" I interrupted, my voice steady despite the tornado of emotions inside me. "Can you explain the 6 months of lies? The fake book club? The credit card charges? Or perhaps you'd like to explain the texts about how much you enjoy deceiving your oblivious husband?" Jason found his voice first. "Listen, Mann. Don't." The word came out like a whip crack. "The only reason you're still standing is that assault charges would complicate my divorce proceedings." I turned back to Sarah, who had begun to tremble. "Speaking of which," Marcus chose that moment to enter, his briefcase in hand. Lauren followed with her camera, methodically documenting the scene. Sarah's eyes darted between them, realization dawning on her face as her carefully constructed world began to crumble. "You've been watching us," she whispered. "Correction, I've been gathering evidence. There's a difference." I nodded to Lauren, who continued taking photos. "You see, Sarah, while you were busy planning romantic getaways with your yoga instructor, I was planning too. The movers finished with my things this morning. The bank accounts are separated. The divorce papers are ready. You can't just dash," she started. But I cut her off again. "I can, and I have. But here's what's really going to interest you both." I turned to Jason, who had finally found his shirt and was attempting to look dignified while fumbling with the buttons. "Lauren, would you like to share what you found about Mr. Enlightened Yoga Instructor here?" Lauren pulled out her phone, reading from her notes. Jason Thompson, age 34, married to Rebecca Thompson for 8 years, father of 2, currently involved in affairs with 3 different women from his yoga studio, including Mrs. Wilson here. His wife is already aware. We contacted her yesterday. The color drained from Jason's face. Sarah staggered backward, gripping the couch for support. The reality of their situation was finally setting in, and it looked nothing like the romantic fantasy they'd constructed. Sarah collapsed onto the couch, her carefully constructed world disintegrating around her. The confident, manipulative woman of moments ago had vanished, replaced by someone I barely recognized, small, frightened, and utterly exposed. Jason stood awkwardly between us, his facade of spiritual enlightenment stripped away to reveal nothing but a common deceiver. "Rebecca's lawyer will be contacting you Monday," I continued, watching Jason's face contort with the realization that his own marriage was imploding. "She's particularly interested in how you've been using her credit cards to fund your extracurricular activities. Apparently, spiritual guidance doesn't pay as well as you led everyone to believe." "You had no right," Sarah finally managed, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "This was private dash. Private." I let out a harsh laugh. "Like the private jokes you two shared about me? The private plans you made using our joint accounts? Or maybe you mean the private messages you sent about how exciting it was to deceive your husband?" I pulled out my phone, scrolling through screenshots. Should I read some of them aloud? Lauren continued documenting everything: Sarah's crumbling composure, Jason's growing panic, the evidence of their romantic evening scattered across the room. Marcus stood quietly by the door, his presence a reminder that this was no longer a domestic dispute, but a legal proceeding. "The divorce papers are fairly straightforward," Marcus spoke up, his professional tone cutting through the tension. "Given the extensive evidence of infidelity and financial misconduct, Mrs. Wilson, I suggest you sign them without contest. It will be easier that way." Jason made a move toward the door, but Lauren stepped into his path. "I recommend you stay until we're finished. Your wife's lawyer will want to verify these photos personally." I turned back to Sarah, who sat clutching her silk robe like armor. "You know what the saddest part is? I would have given you anything, supported any dream, worked through any problem. Instead, you chose to throw away 15 years for some cheap thrills with a fraud who can't even pay for his own hotel rooms." "It wasn't like that," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "We had a connection, Dash. A connection built on lies," I interrupted. "Tell me, Sarah, did he feed the same spiritual enlightenment lines to his other students? The ones he was seeing on Mondays and Wednesdays while you had your Thursday slot?" The color drained from her face as she turned to Jason, who couldn't meet her eyes. Another illusion shattered, another betrayal revealed. The irony might have been amusing if it wasn't so tragic. Marcus stepped forward, placing the divorce papers on the wine-stained coffee table. "Everything is detailed here: the division of assets, the evidence of infidelity, the documentation of financial misconduct. You can have your lawyer review them, but I assure you, contesting would only make things more public." I watched as Sarah stared at the papers, her hands shaking, the magnitude of what she'd lost. Not just her marriage, but her reputation, her dignity, and even her illusions about her lover, seemed to finally hit her. She reached for the pen Marcus offered, her signature wobbly but legible. "I've arranged for a car to take you home," I said, my voice devoid of the warmth it had held for 15 years. "Your things are where you left them. I'll be gone by the time you return." I turned to leave, then paused. You know, for someone who spent so much time at a yoga studio, you never did learn much about balance or integrity. The sound of Sarah's quiet sobs followed me down the stairs, mixing with the rustle of Lauren's camera and Marcus's professional murmurs about legal proceedings. Outside, the lake reflected the last light of day, its surface disturbed by a rising wind. I walked to my car, leaving behind the shattered remains of a marriage built on lies and the two people who had destroyed it. Thank you for listening the story to the end. Write your thoughts about it in the comments and do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next videos.